This is a forum, not a debate. Each candidate will have equal time to introduce themselves and their platforms, and then they'll take turns answering a couple of questions of general interest to the business community in Yakima. The candidates will not be taking questions during the forum, but will be available to talk to you afterwards. I will be a timekeeper, and given our time constraints, I ask that you not interrupt too often with applause so that they have a chance to use all of their time.
Oh. I've been the only time in my life.
I know. But briefly, I will introduce our candidates. We have Gabriel Munoz to my left, who prefers Democratic Party. Senator Jim Honeyford, who prefers Republican Party, and they are candidates for the Senate seat. We have Representative Bruce Chandler for House of Representatives Position 1, prefers Republican Party. To his left, we have Representative David Taylor, who prefers Republican Party, and Teodora Martinez-Chavez, who prefers Democratic Party. And again, they are candidates for Position 2. We'll now begin with opening statements from each of the candidates of not more than 5 minutes. And if they will please explain who they are and why they're running. And we'll begin with Mr. Munoz.
Thank you very much, John, for having us here and inviting us to be here today with you. I want to thank everybody here as well for making time and being engaged civically as well. I also want to thank everybody else that's on the board as well. Well, my name is Gabriel Munoz, and I'm running for the state senate. And I got my inspiration from my little daughter Allison. And when I saw her for the first time, my world changed. And I know that if you're a parent here, I know that you know what I'm talking about. And I knew that I had to do something and not just talk about the issues and the problems, but actually be a part of the solution and be proactive. If we look at our community, the Yakima Valley, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that we need change. And so one of the things that I was doing, or when I grew up in Wapato, I was working with my parents. We opened up a restaurant, and I worked there till I was 12. Or in 12th grade, I graduated. I enlisted in the U.S. Army. I was a sergeant. I did 3 years active, 4 reserve. I enrolled at YVCC, graduated from there, and transferred to Central Washington University. I was a student body president there. I represented over 10,000 students at 7 different satellite locations. Soon after, I was offered a sales manager position here in Yakima Valley. I did that for several years, and then I was offered a branch management position for a bank. Now I currently work for people as a business outreach coordinator / instructor, where I work with businesses to try to give people a second chance. I also work with potential employees with some skills, interviewing skills, making sure that they know what professionalism is and how to find a job with resume building and things like that. Some of the issues that I do want to work on is the transportation, fully funding education, and making sure that we have a good economy based on our small businesses and making sure that we don't burden them with more taxes. It's very interesting to look at some of the stats that we have out here in our Yakima Valley. We look at the health issues that we have, as well as educational. We have the lowest graduation out here, 3 times lower than the state's average. We also have the highest poverty out here in the last 10 years. It's increased. Dropout rates have increased as well. The Yakima County has more poverty, like I said, fewer college graduates, and a lot of people that are insured above the state average. These are some of the issues that I'll be working on. We need change, we need a new vision, a new direction, and I think through the experiences that I've had with working with our community, I think I could bring a different perspective to Olympia and work with other senators and other legislators to make sure that things change in the 15th district. Thank you very much.
I am Senator Jim Honeyford. A little background, I started work, of course, as a teenager. I worked the fields and canneries and packing houses and things like that, truck driver and all kinds of jobs. Went off to college, and during the college years I went to work in Ellensburg as a police officer and worked there for 5 years. Ended up getting 2 bachelor's degrees and left when I didn't make sergeant, figuring the guy would be there forever, and small department, you don't get much chance for advancement. So I then went to Sunnyside, where I was a teacher and a coach, and later I became the school librarian. I was there in education for 28 and a half years until I was elected to the House. During that time, I also served on the Sunnyside City Council. I owned and operated a farm for about 20 years, just sold it 7 years ago, and all those experiences I think are good for my background and my work in the legislature. I was first elected in 1994, and when I went in, I knew there were term limits. I thought it'd be 6 years and I'd be out. Shortly after that, the term limits were overturned by the Supreme Court, and I was elected to the Senate in 1998, started my term in 1998. The committees I serve on are financial, the Ways and Means Committee. I'm also chair of the capital budget, and the capital budget was about $2 billion in bonds and $1.2 billion in cash this last year. And during this last year, I was the sponsor of, well, it was really Representative Chandler's bill, the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan bill, which the governor then took as request legislation. And also being chair of the capital budget, we got that bill passed and appropriated about $130 million to implement some parts of the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. Most of that was in a huge environmental purchase up in the Tianaway, and the other is money for continuing the exploration of various water storage projects. And as we all know, water is so important to our Yakima Valley for the economy. And so also now this year I'm working on a new piece of legislation which we call the Big Water Bill, I guess, between the House and the Senate and the environmental communities. It's probably going to be in the neighborhood of somewhere between $3 and $6 billion. It will be voted on by the people because we'll have to bond that, but it will put about $1 billion into flood control, $1 billion into stormwater, and another $1 billion into water supply, which would be Yakima Basin, Columbia Basin. And so those are all very important water pieces of legislation we're working on. So far, Labor is said they'll be working with us, and the environmental community are working with us, and there'll be some polling, but we need to figure out what's going to be the debt service to cover that debt. And so there will be a policy bill and a referendum to the people for the bonds. I also serve on the Environment Committee, and have worked on that committee for several years, and that's and also the Agriculture and Water Committee, and that's the committee that does all the water legislation that's so important. I'm the ranking member on that committee. I'm also the deputy or assistant floor leader. As I mentioned, that puts me in leadership, and I've been in leadership for many years, and also serving as the chair of capital budget, which is a fiscal committee. So with that, that's my background, that's my experience, and that's my work, and what I anticipate doing in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, John. Appreciate you guys taking the time to visit with us today. This is a very exciting time. It's an interesting and different election, but it's also an exciting time just for the life of the valley. I was actually born in Everett, Washington, but I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. So it's kind of seafood from both coasts. And after I left school, I came back to Washington State, and I've spent the last 34 years farming and being part of Washington agriculture. And that's really kind of shaped my life, and it's left a pretty indelible mark on my children as well. none of them farm today. I ran for the legislature in 1998, and I did it because I believed that there were issues that were not being addressed properly in Olympia regarding agriculture. It was really ag issues. I worked on ag labor issues, pesticide issues, and business regulation issues before I was elected to office. And so I during my time in the House, I've been on numerous committees and different assignments, but I primarily, it's been as the lead Republican on the Agriculture and Natural Resource Committee. And then currently I am the lead Republican on the Appropriations Committee. Unlike in the Senate, where Ways and Means both talks about how to raise the money and then spending it, we just spend. And we leave it to another committee to decide where they're going to come up with the money. I think that this is a particularly important and exciting time in the life of the Yakima Valley, and it is particularly true because there are 2 points of view in Olympia, and one is that if we just hold steady and keep doing the same thing for the next 12 or 18 months, then the economy is going to come back to the way it was, and we can start to move forward. My view, and the view of many of us in the legislature, a growing number anyway, I'm pretty optimistic, is that it's not going back to the way it was. That trying to cling to 20th century solutions to 21st century challenges just isn't going to work anymore. And the most important thing we can do is recognize, I certainly do, my kids are all in their 30s, and you know, their generation is a generation that gets to look forward to paying off their college loans maybe before or after their kids start college. And if they get their kids through college, it will happen just in time for them to start taking care of me, which is what kids are supposed to do, right? You know, I think they deserve better than that, and I think it's important that they have to be better. The future has to be better than that. Things have to change, and they're going to change thoughtfully, strategically, or they're going to change on their own, and not for the best. So I believe that the Yakima Valley, and Central Washington generally, but especially Yakima Valley, is extremely well positioned to take on the 21st century. And if we do the right things and we're prudent, we can actually be the driving force in economic growth going into the future. People don't often recognize, especially on the other side, that agriculture is actually a larger business than Boeing. It has more employees. It has about 3 times the employees that Boeing does now. And I think that it's just one example. I think in agriculture you're going to see technology reduce the demand for human labor in the industry in some dramatic ways. And yet people are still going to want to live here, and they're going to still want to be a part of the regional economy. And so I think it's important to get ahead of the curve on that and work with people who know how to build jobs for the future, so that we can continue to have people invest their lives here. I always tell people that okay, one more thing. Yakima is a place that people spend the first half of their life trying to get out of, and they spend the rest of their life trying to get back to. And I hope that I can contribute to them coming home.
Well, thank you, John. Thanks, Chamber, for the invitation to be here today. I'm David Taylor. I'm one of your 2 state representatives from the 15th District. Bruce really hit the nail on the head, and these are interesting times. We've seen, since my time in Olympia, we've seen really the same solutions repeated over and over and over again. And as new ideas come up, they're not given sufficient, in my opinion, sufficient look. Now, my background's local government. I spent 10 years in local government on the permitting side of helping people work through that process, getting permits so they can start their business, expand their business. And then I spent the next 5 years after leaving that on the private side, again, helping people get through that process of building a new business or expanding a business. And so what I've done is since being appointed and then elected in 2009 in the legislature, is really focus on the regulatory aspects of government. How can government more efficiently get through a process so that the landowners, the property owners, can do what they need to do to make a living? Now, we, on average, I'll give you the example, on average in this state for transportation projects, 15% of the cost is in environmental compliance. It can be as high as 45%, depending on the location. So what are ideas that we as a legislative body could move forward to reduce those costs? And there are actually plenty. We put forward some of those bill ideas last year. We're going to continue to push those forward. Looking at existing environmental regulation instead of creating yet another duplicative process that, as we call in the policy wonk world, the do loop. Well, when you do this, you can get your permit. Now you need to do this, and now you need to do this. Let's get it down to there's one set of expectations, those are met, and we can get business growing. Washington State in general, but really in the 15th district, Yakima Valley in total, there are two major employers, small business and government. One produces revenue, one consumes revenue. It's incumbent upon us as legislators, I think, to put forward policies that create the atmosphere so that we can actually grow the job base that is revenue producing instead of consuming. We have that opportunity. Sometimes, Olympia, sometimes you look at the votes that are coming, and in my opinion, the easier vote more often than not is the vote to raise a tax. Instead of looking outside the box, looking for new opportunities to create economic growth and create that added revenue to support state functions. I believe that the state's primary responsibility is public safety, education, and the infrastructure. If you look at the state constitution, it specifically talks about those things, with education being the only place in the Constitution where it's the paramount duty. So we need to return, in a nutshell, return to the priorities of government, look at what we're funding, prioritize that spending, and then determine whether or not additional revenue is necessary. Keeping in mind that every biennium the budget grows by roughly 7% automatic. Is that enough? There's a lot of businesses out there that would really like to have that automatic 7% growth. Let's put the policies in place that allow that to happen. We don't need to create more jobs as government. We need to create the atmosphere in which the business, the private world, can grow. Again, John and the Chamber, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate it, and I look forward to chatting with you all later.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, John. Thank you, Chamber, for inviting me today. My name is Theodora Martinez-Chavez, and I am a tireless community advocate for the last 20 years. And I have been involved in various organizations and agencies in the upper and the lower county that provides services to families in need. I was raised in the Yakima Valley for 48 years and attended school in Granger for 12 years, 13 even count kindergarten. My parents were farm workers. They worked the Yakima Valley for many years for various growers, ranchers, farmers, and they were originally from Tamaulipas, Mexico, which is right on the border of Texas. They crossed into Texas illegally many years ago, but then because of amnesty became legal residents. I was born in Raymondville, Texas, which is a really small southern town. And at the age of 2, my parents loaded all of us kids up, because I have 4 siblings, into a car and drove across the Northwest to come to Washington State along with a lot of other Texans. The reason they did that was, well, in Texas at that time in the 60s, there was a lot of discrimination, a lot of injustices, and they wanted a better future for their kids. one of the things that I remember when I came into Outlook was, because I live in a small community of Outlook, well, not in the community, but on the outside, was the farmland and the dirt and the sun. And my parents working hard every day and dragging us kids to the fields with them because there was no childcare at the time for us. So my playpen was an apple bin, and my toys were apples on sticks and rocks and mud and cherries. Anyway, from my experiences being raised and educated in the community, I know how hard it is to raise a family and to make ends meet. I am a former teen mother, and I raised my son and daughter as a single mother. And when both of my children graduated high school in 2000 and 2001, that's when they told me, Mom, you need to get a life. You need to do something with yourself. So I decided to go back to college, and I graduated with my master's degree a couple of years later from Heritage University. I had attended YVC and Central Washington University during the years that my children were in school. I guess the first time I actually got involved in some type of leadership was when they asked me to run for Metro president at both YVC and at Central Washington University. And I got to learn quite a bit about leadership and strong role models. I became involved in this campaign because as a volunteer in my various agencies and organizations, I saw too many services that were not being provided to our communities. And when I asked people why are services not being provided, I was told, well, nobody wants to step up and do it. So then I would decide to do it, and that's how I became, I guess you can say, community advocate. So people would come to me and say, well, you need to do it. And I would say, okay, well, I'll do it. And the same thing happened this year when they said, have you ever thought about running for politics? And I said, no, I never really thought about it. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized, well, yeah, I'm willing to do that. I think it is time that we have more female representation, and especially someone that understands the community. My main concerns are quality education for all students from preschool to college. One of my former jobs was doing home visits to families of preschoolers in the upper and the lower valley. I would provide preschool activities in both English and Spanish, and I would encourage parents to read to their children and why preschool education is so important for the success of their children. I also believe in quality healthcare for all, especially our senior citizens and our veterans. We need healthcare that provides full dental and mental health coverage. I am a former navigator assister, and I helped enroll families into the Affordable Care Act, this first enrollment period that began in October until March. I believe senior citizens and their families and veterans and their families need additional resources to support services. For example, why should Central Washington not have a super clinic such as those in Spokane and Tacoma for veterans? Many of our veterans are having to travel so far just to get the needed additional services. I believe small business owners need an adequate support to succeed and prosper. I believe taxes need to be leveled for both small and large businesses. Small business owners should be able to support their families on what they make and be able to hire more employees and not pay more taxes. An interesting note, only 27% of small businesses are run by women. I would like to see that increased. I believe youth services need to be provided to all youth at no cost or low cost. As a former single mother and former foster parent, I know how expensive activities can be and how important it is to keep them active for their physical and mental health. We need to look at...
Sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. There will be closing statement time, so if you did not get a chance, any of you, to complete all of your opening statements and there was a point you wanted to make, you will have an opportunity to do that as part of your closing statement. Our next question, and the following questions were prepared by the Government Affairs Committee. The first, and we'll take them in reverse order, beginning with Ms. Martinez-Chavez, is if elected, what would you do to improve the business climate in the state and in Central Washington in particular? You will each have 2 minutes to respond to this question.
Okay. So I would probably look at a comprehensive transportation to see how we can provide better transportation services to people in our community. We really need to be providing, I know right now we do have some transportation that's being offered for families in the lower valley to come up to Yakima. But I know in the last few years that the schedule has been shortened. And we really need to increase that back up again, because I know there are a lot of families. I myself had used it several times when I needed transportation to Yakima from the lower valley. So there is a need for it. We just need to make sure that we increase that, so more families are able to come to the Yakima Valley. I also think, or the Yakima area. I also believe that we need to expand it so transportation can be offered all over the county, not just in certain areas, to be able to bring people to come into our area. I think we need to increase the minimum wage, probably in small increments throughout the next few years, so that people that are working actually have a better living wage, so that they can hopefully spend the extra money to help our economy here. I believe that we need to provide some type of employment standards for our youth, so that they can also start earning some money so they can better spend it on our services here, and that will increase our economy as well.
Well, where to begin on that? I already hit on some of it with the idea of regulatory reform. You know, we live in a state that it has a significant burden in the environmental regulation and the business regulation that really hampers economic development opportunities. I was with Kittitas County when Sun Katy Resort was being developed, and the environmental review necessary for that project, and keep in mind that project was roughly 75% open space. The environmental review for that was over $4 million. I think we have an opportunity to create laws and create policies that really streamline that permit process. We've run bills in the past that aim to do that. In fact, some of them were signed into law as far back as 1995. The problem is the government itself has never really implemented those. So they've created a framework in some instances, but it's never been implemented. So we're continuing to work to streamline that process. More importantly than that, though, is the day-to-day rules that business operates under through the Washington Administrative Code, or the WACs. Any given year, on average, it's roughly 1,200 changes in those rules. So our businesses, on any given year, are change. They're seeing the regulatory scheme they operate under change. There's no predictability. We need to address that. We've run bills to address that by providing, for example, new rules must be adopted by December 1st of any given year, and they sit idle until the following legislative session. Why? It gives the legislature that oversight to go in and say, you know what, that's beyond our original scope, that's beyond our original legislative intent, we need to scale that back, and it can be addressed up front instead of trying to play catch up. So taxes are a huge issue as far as business growth and development. I think there are opportunities to really reform some of the way the taxes are collected. The B&O tax, for example, going to a net instead of a gross accounts would certainly help many of our small businesses throughout. There are opportunities there. We've just got to be willing to look for them and then implement them.
Thank you. I think that there are, in addition to some of what has already been said, there's several things that I focus on and will be this session as well. One is to have a sustainable and stable budget, one that's, I think, more predictability is important to the business community. They have confidence that we aren't going to be constantly changing the game, either with regulations or with taxes or with legal cases even sometimes. But I think that having a stable budget is one that people can plan for the future on, and I think that's extremely important. The other thing is, I think that as far as local school districts, local government, public works projects and things, all can be planned and executed much more effectively, and we can do a more strategic, more thoughtful job at education if people have confidence of what the near-term future looks like, and they can budget accordingly. I also think public safety is extremely important, and I believe that we to continue to need, I think, some support, and I think this county, this valley, has shown a commitment to creating safe communities, and I think that that's absolutely essential. I mean, people, if they're going to move into any community, are looking at is it safe, and does it have decent schools. The other thing is Central Washington has to have an assured supply of water for the future. And we have all three of us have been working relentlessly on that since we were elected, whether we thought we would or not. But it is one of the, thank you, it is one of the core crucial things we have to address.
Well, they've already had quite a list here, and I concur with much of what they said. The water is so essential to our economy of our valley that we have to have an assured water supply. I know Representative Chandler and I have been involved in most of the major water legislation that's gone through, well, all the water legislation gone through the legislature, the Columbia River Bill, the Yakima Basin Bill, the Municipal Water Bill. Those are all important pieces of water legislation. We've been involved with that, and that's so important for our economy. The other is education, and keeping higher education affordable. And we in the Senate insisted, our majority coalition insisted that we continue the freeze on tuition increases. And I hate to tell you that, but the budget that came, the first budget came out of the Democrat-controlled House, eliminated that and was going to allow tuition increases. And to me, the tuition increases hurt the middle class because they don't have grant programs, they don't have rich parents, and they're the ones that suffer by not being able to afford the cost of higher education. So that, I believe, is something that we must continue trying to control the cost of tuition. Secondly, I'd like to mention, put a plug in for Perry Tech. It's one of the greatest technical schools in the state, and they provide excellent education and have an extremely high placement rate. I believe it's better than 90 to 93% for most of the different training programs they have. Well, other than that, fair and equitable taxes for businesses. And I like the idea that was proposed that we make the B&O tax on net rather than gross, because that is just really an income tax on business, and it really is very detrimental to, especially to starting businesses. Thank you.
Well, everything they said. No, I'm just playing. One of the biggest things that we do have to do and work on is in education. Obviously, like Senator Honeyford just talked about in terms of tuition increasing this year, probably that's something I'm obviously going to work hard for it not to happen. I understand the value of education and what it does to someone like myself who never grew up knowing anybody that was a college graduate other than people at my school or my teachers. So I understand the value in education as well. We need to keep those students from going to bigger cities and coming back here and using their talents to improve our community, all the way to the Yakima Valley. We also need to make sure that we use the natural resources that we have out here and invest in technology. We were talking earlier about having a different way of conducting business in Olympia. And we have a lot of young people with different ideas, with new visions, a different way of interacting with our community members, and we need to take advantage of that and have more students or more young people participate civically as well, so that we can incorporate some of those new things, the new technology that they've learned and experienced going through college and with this, the internet and things like that. So we need to use them, their ideas. And then the other thing is, based on some of my experiences working with businesses, my parents and I started a business 25 years ago, and it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of training. Every year my parents are they're always thinking about different ways of innovating. And one of the biggest things that I want to say, I want to thank this agency here for giving free advice on business plans and things like that. We need more of that in the Yakima Valley. We got a lot of great ideas, but a lot of people just don't know how to implement them. And so if we could take advantage of those situations and have more of these agencies that provide free services, then we could take advantage of that and increase our economic situation here in the Yakima Valley.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, and then lady. Our next question is dealing with the state budget. The state's Economic and Revenue Forecast Council has projected that state revenues will increase by 8% through 2017. Unfortunately, currently authorized programs are projected to grow at an even faster rate, and that's not even without addressing the $1 to $2 billion in additional education spending that might be required as a result of the McCleary decision. If elected, how would you close the gap between revenues and planned spending? You each have 2 minutes for this question, beginning with Mr. Munoz.
So the way the budget is divided, we have 43.9% that is spent on public schools, 36.8% is spent on human services, 8.4% on higher education, 2.6% in general government, and 1.8% in natural resources. We have a lot of different things that we are spending money on that is necessary for our state. Now, one of the biggest things that we got to do is close some loopholes in our tax system. We need to increase, not necessarily increase, but help small businesses with tax breaks so that they could then reinvest in their business, hire more people, and pay better wages. That's going to create a lot more revenue for our community so that they could spend more money. We do have bigger businesses that can afford to pay more taxes, and we need to make sure that they're not getting the big tax breaks and actually paying the same amount of, in terms of percentage, that smaller businesses pay, so that we can pay for education. He said something about paying $2 billion to fully fund education. I was looking at those numbers. It's more closer to $1.7 billion that we're going to have to come up with to pay for that. And I think that if we could close those loopholes on bigger businesses and decrease the taxes or tax breaks for small businesses, we could do that.
Thank you. An excellent question. As mentioned, the budget's growing 7%, or just about $3 billion. And if you look at the state spending, you look at the social service programs, that's had a rate of increase about like this, and where the rate of education spending is much less. And so I believe that we should be putting the money into education first, and that's our constitutional mandate. So we need to support education funding. I don't believe that we need to increase taxes. If we get $3 billion more in revenue, we should then look at the spending aspect. And as far as tax incentives or tax breaks or tax loopholes, whatever you want to call them, many of those are for smaller businesses to enable them to reinvest their money into their businesses. And the one that people like to point at is the Boeing tax exemption, which, as I understand, hasn't taken effect yet until they certify it. But that was to keep them in the state and keep the jobs that they have, and plus increase jobs in the new technologies, particularly the fibers that need to be used in new planes. And we have invested in technical schools to give that kind of training so that they'll be able to be employed by Boeing and work on the new carbon fiber process. And so I believe that we need to use the budget that we have. We need to look and control the spending that is going on, invest in education. Now, if you look at the McCleary decision, that's probably going to be about $1 to $2 billion, and if the class size initiative passes, that's going to be about $4.2 billion until it's implemented, and then approximately, I think it's $1.7 billion biannually after that. The money isn't there. I don't know how far taxes would have to be raised to accomplish that end, but I don't believe that the citizens will take that. If you look at the recent tax initiatives, people have voted them down. And so it's a difficult problem, But that's what we get served on Ways and Means for, to figure out how to do it. And last time we said we didn't need any increase in taxes, so we fund $1 billion from McCleary, and that's what we did. So we will continue working and finding the solutions so we can fund. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think that it's important to keep in mind that when we passed the budget, and it was a supplemental budget this past spring, it was it balanced. It is a balanced budget out for 4 years, and that was a law that was passed the year before that requires us to do that, and I think it's a good one. It should make the budget more stable. We're still, I think, looking at a balance of about $29 million at the end of 4 years, which is positive. It's not a huge number in connection with a $35 billion or $36 billion budget, but it's positive, which it hasn't been for a number of years. One of the issues is education reform. What's it going to look like? Is it going to continue to be Common Core, which was passed 5 years ago, or whether it's going to be something else, or we're going to go back to the Wassel and to the state reform of the early '90s, which is what would happen if we simply said we repeal Common Core commitment, and we don't have another alternative. It defaults back to the Wassel, which everybody loved and longs for apparently. Healthcare reform and how it moves forward is going to have a big impact on the budget, and as well as some of the new programs. But like Jim, I think that many of us in the House believe that education should be funded first, and then we'll adjust. But House Republicans have three main priorities. One is funding education, and the other one is public safety, and the third one is providing for the most vulnerable in our communities. I'd like to say one more thing. When it comes to McCleary, the core of that court ruling is not how much you spend, it is how much is state property tax money and how much is local levies. That relationship is what's at issue here, and I think we can work that out.
Well, it's easy when you're fourth to say, yeah, I agree. Fund education first. We've run that bill several times in the House. Both Bruce and I co-sponsored that bill. Creating a stable, predictable budget for the long term, absolutely agree with. Let me take a little different tack. 43% of this state is publicly owned. Yakima County, that number rises to 76%. How can we put our working lands that are publicly owned and managed back into the working landscape? Some of the ideas we put forward is requiring the agencies to actually consider economic development opportunities on those lands. Looking at the lands, are they part of a core area that provide a core function for fish and wildlife, or are they separate, are they standalone? And if they are, what's the value? Should those possibly be sold back into private ownership and put back on the tax rolls? We've run bills that look for other revenue without raising taxes. A few years ago, we had the non-tribal gaming bill that would have dedicated roughly $200 million directly to education every biennium. We've looked at the land transfers, public land transfers that other states are doing, Utah, Idaho, Montana, that are saying no, based upon not only the state enabling law, but the management of that land, the state can do a better job and it actually produces more revenue to the schools. There are options out there that we can actually address the difference between the revenue projections and projected state spending without raising taxes and returning to the priorities of government.
Okay, when I went to Central Washington University, the reason I only went there 3 years was because I originally went there to be a bilingual teacher. But at that time, they had let us know that the Wassel was coming down. And so everything our professors had taught us, one professor said, I'll be honest, everything I taught you, you're not gonna use. He goes, everything I taught you, you're gonna have to teach to the test so that the students can pass the test. And so I finished out that quarter and then I dropped out of college and I took a break for a year because my dream was to be a bilingual teacher. I thought I would have been a good one, but I was so discouraged that I just stopped. So when I went to Heritage, I got my BA in Interdisciplinary Studies because I just wanted to get my BA. I did not want to go into education. And then I got my master's in education and counseling. A few years ago, my nephew graduated from Granger High School, and he went on to college at Wazoo. And the first year when he came back, he told me my high school did not prepare me for college. He goes, I went to college with my two best buddies. 2 of them are dropping out. He goes, but I'm staying because I got a scholarship and I want to succeed. He goes, but I have to take all of these classes that are not, my credits are not going to count. And so to me, education is so important. We need to have better education for our youth because they are our future leaders and our future workforce. And that way our businesses don't have to outsource those jobs. We can have our youth here to be our future workforce. But anyway, I do think that there, are a lot of us pay a lot of, taxes and gas taxes, state sales taxes, even tabs. When we have to buy our car tabs, we're paying. And so I do think that we need to spend the taxes that the state collect wisely. And I also agree with Gabriel as far as the loopholes and the taxes. I do think that there are a lot of people or organizations or corporations that, because of the loopholes, thank you.
Excuse me. Each of the candidates will now have 2 minutes to finish any remarks that I cut them off in the interest of time, or make any other closing remarks before the end of our program. Again, 2 minutes, and we'll begin with Ms. Martinez-Chavez.
Thank you. So I guess my closing remark will be is that I'm Teodora Martinez-Chavez. I'm very proud to be an American, and I plan to run my campaign with dignity and respect. And I plan to answer to the people of the 15th Legislative District and will represent them proudly. I plan to open a local office because I do believe that I need to hear from the voters so that they can help me make the decisions I need to better serve our community. Thank you.
Well, again, John and the Chamber, thank you so much for inviting us here for this little get-together luncheon and candidate forum. We're facing interesting times in this state, and we've really reached the point, in my estimation, where we have to think outside the box. We have to start considering new ideas, new approaches across the board, not just education funding, not just funding for DSHS as an example, and not just school funding. We have to start looking for opportunities that create the sustainable budget, sustainable, predictable funding for everybody. We can, in fact, do better, and frankly, we must do better, because right now we're facing a situation, in my estimation, that is unsustainable. We're relying on a budget that each year grows more heavily dependent upon federal money. This last year, the supplemental budget was $8 billion more of federal money. That's not sustainable. The answers are out there. The answers are not partisan in nature. We need to reach across the aisle, look for some of those answers, develop those ideas, and ultimately make Washington a better place with a sustainable budget. Again, thank you all for having us here today, and I'll be around later for questions.
Well, I do think that we're in an exciting time, and I believe that Yakima is a place to be. And I've been, I've been blessed, and my family has, by being able to be part of the community around Granger and Zilla, and to come in new to a small town and people accept you is an inspiring thing. Something that doesn't happen in urban communities. And so, my vision is that we will carry that forward and still keep that kind of spirit and strength of the community, even as it becomes more prosperous and as it grows. And I believe that we can meet the challenges, and I believe that we demonstrated that last year, and I think that this coming year, in spite of what the election does, when all else fails, the legislature will do the right thing. But I've always believed that, and if I don't, then I'll quit. I want to thank everyone for listening to me, for supporting me. You know, I serve in the House of Representatives. It's a great opportunity. I mean, it's an inspiring position to stand on the floor of the House and take a vote for your friends, your neighbors, your family. I can't even describe it, the power of that. I could not do that without you guys. And I know that most of the people in this room have been eager to communicate with me in sometimes blunt way, but you know, a way that I understand. And I could not be successful and do the job without you. And so I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Chamber, and thank all of you for coming to this. My priorities in the legislature are the economy and jobs, the budget, of course, and education, and I value education quite highly. I worked my way through college as a police officer and went back and got a master's degree after that, after I was a teacher. Some of my community activities, I've been involved with Habitat for Humanity, served on the board, and my wife was chair of the board here in Yakima for several years. I was chair of the committee in our church that financed and built a Habitat house, so I appreciate housing as an issue. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Civil Air Patrol and a commander of the legislative squadron, which is to meets in Olympia occasionally. I am the co-chair of the Heritage Caucus, which deals with museums and history and things like that, art. And I'm also co-chair and founder of the Aviation Caucus, which is to support general aviation. And I do all my own emails, and so if you email me, the answer you get back you may not like, but it's from me. And I write it myself, and the staff doesn't do it for me. So that way I keep in touch with all the voters. And when we used to have a huge district, I would go down and have meetings in those districts, but then I found that people were calling me and sending me emails or faxes in those days, and we kept in contact that way, and I never really felt the need to have a district office because, well, my assistant in Olympia lives in Olympia, and she'd have to move over here during this interim, and I didn't think that was fair for her either. So that's where I am, and I ask for your support and your vote this November. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I've decided to come back to Yakima and raise my daughter here. And I'm not going to stand by and let the same things happen over and over again. We've looked at the rates here. I talked a little bit about the Yakima Valley being one of the worst in the country in terms of crime. We look at the dropout rates are 3 times higher than in our state. We look at the obesity rates, which are the highest in the U.S. And we look at the poverty rate we have the poverty rate higher than the average. Fewer people go to college, or fewer students go to college in the Yakima Valley. And there's more uninsured community members in our valley. Now, this is not where I want to raise my daughter. I want to raise her in a different Yakima Valley. And that's why I'm running. If you want a voice in Olympia that's going to be an advocate for you, then I'm that person. I have a different vision and a new direction, which is going to help our community. I'm counting on your vote this November, and as well as informing the community about some of the things that have been happening in our community. Thank you very much for allowing us to be here, inviting us, and And for everybody that's here today, thank you very much.
That concludes our questions for today. As I said earlier, the candidates will be around to answer a few more after we're finished, if you had some of your own that you wanted to ask. As a reminder, if you enjoy candidate forums of this kind, the Chamber's General Membership Luncheon on Monday, September 8th will feature the 2 final general election candidates for Yakima County Prosecutor and Yakima County Sheriff. That will be at noon at the Red Lion. Please join me in thanking all of our candidates who are willing to serve our community and who took time out of their days to be here to talk to us about the issues today. Thank you all.